Picture this: a knife-thin ridge in the Andes, 2,400 meters up, where clouds scrape the rock like slow-moving smoke. No wide roads, no gentle approach, just cliffs, jungle, and empty air. And yet, up there, someone built a city. Not a messy pile of stones, not rough huts. A planned complex of terraces, plazas, temples, and homes carved into the spine of a mountain, with walls made from massive granite blocks so perfectly fitted, you can't slide a blade between them. Here's the part that makes engineers blink twice. The builders had no iron saws, no cranes, no draft animals, no practical wheel and cart system for that terrain. They worked granite, one of the hardest rocks, like it was clay. So the first question isn't who built Machu Picchu. We know it was the Inca world, likely under the Emperor Pachacuti, around the mid-1400s. Because the real question is darker and sharper. Why would a civilization build something this precise in a place that seems designed to kill builders? And why did it stay hidden for centuries, when it sat only about 100 kilometers from Cusco? Let's start with motive. Most people hear lost city and imagine a fortress. But Machu Picchu doesn't behave like a fortress. It's high, yes, but it's not arranged like a purely military site. It feels curated, symbolic, almost theatrical, like the mountain itself was part of the architecture, which leads to an unsettling hypothesis. What if Machu Picchu was never meant to be found by outsiders at all, because it wasn't just a city? What if it was a machine, a ritual-engineered space, built to control something the Inca believed was real? Not control as in science fiction lasers. Control as in alignments, such as calendars, power, legitimacy. A place where stone and sky were stitched together so the empire could claim, the sun answers to us. Look at the layout, and you see obsession, not convenience. Windows placed like they're aiming. Pathways that funnel movement like choreography. Sacred zones separated from living quarters with the logic of a temple, not a town. And if you think this is just poetic talk, hold that thought. Because later we're going to talk about what happens when the sun hits certain stones at certain times of year, and why that's not an accident. But before any of that spiritual theater could happen, the Inca had a more brutal enemy to defeat: gravity. A city that high on steep slopes has one guaranteed fate: it slides. Rain turns soil into soup. Foundations rot. Whole districts shear off the mountain. So here's the first real twist of Machu Picchu. The miracle isn't what you see. The miracle is what you don't see. Beneath the plazas and temples, the builders buried an invisible skeleton. Layers of gravel, sand, and crushed stone. An engineered drainage system that behaves like a giant filter. Instead of letting water pool and destroy the ground, it drinks the rain and guides it away. Some estimates suggest that the majority of the labor went into this hidden foundation work. Think about what that means. This wasn't a rushed retreat. This wasn't random survival architecture. This was a project designed by people who understood a truth most modern tourists miss. If you master the water, you master the mountain. Now add another clue: the stone. They didn't haul granite up from the valley like Egyptian obelisks dragged across deserts. The Inca chose a smarter option. They built near a source. A quarry sits right there along the ridge. The mountain provided the raw material, but that only creates the next problem, maybe the most brutal one of all. How do you split, shape, and position multi-ton blocks of granite with no iron tools? There are theories, some simple, some terrifyingly clever. One method: dry wooden wedges hammered into cracks. then soaked with water so the wood expands and slowly forces the rock apart. It's primitive, until you realize it scales. Repeat it enough times with enough workers and time becomes your machine. But splitting a rock is easy compared to the real trick: fitting it. These blocks aren't uniform bricks. They're irregular, multi-faced shapes, like 3D puzzle pieces, crafted so they lock together without mortar. That's not just craftsmanship. See, that's strategy. Because the Andes move. Earthquakes don't politely announce themselves. They strike, and mortar-based walls crack and collapse. Dry-fitted Inca stonework does something else. When the ground shakes, the stones don't break. They dance. They shift, vibrate, absorb the energy, then settle back into place under their own weight. So the city survives what should destroy it. At this point, you might think you found the explanation: genius engineering, massive labor, time, and discipline. But then the timeline ruins your comfort. Machu Picchu was occupied for a relatively short period, around a century or so, then abandoned. Not smashed, not burned, no battlefield litter. It simply emptied, and the jungle swallowed it. And for more than 400 years, it stayed off the world's map. Which raises a second hypothesis: quiet, sinister, and hard to dismiss. What if Machu Picchu wasn't lost, but deliberately erased? Not by nature alone, by people who knew exactly what they were doing. Because when you want a place to vanish, you don't need to destroy the buildings. You destroy the path. And up here, where cliffs and vegetation already guard the ridge, erasing a route is almost as good as erasing the city itself. So here's where part 1 ends, and where the mystery sharpens. Machu Picchu isn't impressive because it's beautiful. It's impressive because it behaves like a decision, an intentional, engineered secret. In part 2, we're going straight into the hardest question. How did they move and place these stones with no wheels, no iron, and no cranes, on slopes that barely forgive a human footstep? And we'll examine the strangest detail of all: those odd handles carved into certain blocks, like the builders left behind a clue, or a signature, or a method they didn't bother to hide. Let's be honest. If you stand in front of Machu Picchu's walls and try to explain them using common sense collapses first. Some of these granite blocks weigh 10, 15, even over 20 tons. They're not sitting on flat ground. They're positioned on terraces, on slopes, sometimes at angles that make your knees ache just looking at them. And remember, no iron, no steel cables, no cranes, no beasts of burden. So how did the stones get there? Here's the uncomfortable truth. The Inca didn't fight the mountain with brute force alone. They redefined what transport meant in a world where wheels were useless. Look at the terrain. Paths here aren't roads. They're staircases. Endless stone steps climbing and folding into the ridge. A wheel would be dead weight. A cart would be a joke. So instead of rolling stones, the Inca slid, levered, and walked them. Imagine hundreds of people moving as one organism. Thick ropes woven from plant fibers biting into their hands. Stones dragged along inclined planes. Logs and rounded river stones placed beneath blocks, not as wheels, but as shifting supports, constantly repositioned as the load crept forward centimeter by centimeter. Slow, yes. Inefficient? Only if time is your enemy. For the Inca, time was a resource, and they had another advantage most modern explanations underestimate: leverage. On many stones, archaeologists found strange protrusions, small knobs left on purpose. For years, people thought they were decorative or unfinished work. But look closer. Those protrusions sit exactly where a louver would need purchase, exactly where a rope would grip without slipping. They weren't mistakes, they were handles. Temporary tools carved directly into the stone itself. Once the block was placed, those handles were often chiseled away, erasing the evidence of how the stone was moved. What remains is the illusion that the block appeared there by some impossible means. Now comes the part that separates Machu Picchu from almost every other ancient site. They didn't aim for perfection first. They aimed for interaction. Each stone was roughly shaped, then pressed against its neighbors. Where it touched, it was marked, removed, reworked, returned, again, and again, and again. This wasn't mass production, this was obsessive iteration. One stone could be fitted dozens of times before it was accepted. Why go to such extremes? Because these walls weren't meant to be rigid. They were meant to move without failing. During earthquakes, a rigid structure resists motion and snaps. An Inca wall yields, it flexes, it absorbs. Think of it like this. Modern buildings survive by being strong. Machu Picchu survives by being forgiving. But stone isn't the only thing doing the work. Step back and look at the city as a whole, and something clicks. Machu Picchu doesn't sit on the mountain like a crown. It sinks into it like roots. Huge natural boulders weren't removed. They were absorbed into walls, foundations, even altars. The builders understood something subtle and terrifyingly modern. The mountain itself is the most stable structure available. So instead of isolating their buildings from the rock, they fused them to it. In doing so, they reduced stress, prevented landslides, and turned the entire ridge into one interconnected system. A city that isn't on the mountain, but is the mountain. And then there's water. Water is the silent killer of stone cities. Too much, and foundations liquefy. Too little, and life fails. Machu Picchu solves both with a precision that borders on arrogance. A natural spring high on a neighboring slope was captured and fed into a stone canal nearly 750 meters long, angled just enough to keep water flowing without eroding the channel. No pumps, no valves, just gravity and calculation. The water enters the city in a controlled sequence. First to elite residences, then cascading through a chain of fountains, each one carefully spaced, each one still functional today. But here's the detail most people miss. Clean water and dirty water never mix, ever. Rainwater drains beneath plazas and buildings through hidden layers of gravel and sand. Waste is carried away. The drinking supply stays pure. This separation is so complete that even modern engineers admit replicating it without plastic pipes and concrete would be a nightmare. Which brings us to an uncomfortable realization. This wasn't a primitive society getting lucky. This was a culture that understood systems, hydrology, seismology, thermal regulation, human flow. Everything feeds into everything else. And now we have to ask a sharper question. If the Inca could design a city that's sophisticated, why did they abandon it? No scorch marks, no collapsed walls, no mass graves from a final stand. They didn't flee in panic. They left deliberately. Valuables gone, sacred items removed, main access routes damaged. This looks less like defeat and more like closure, which sets up the final and most disturbing possibility. What if Machu Picchu was never meant to be permanent in human hands? What if it served a purpose, astronomical, ritual, political, and once that purpose ended, the city was intentionally put to sleep? Because in part 3, We're going to talk about the buildings that don't make sense as houses, the stones that behave like instruments, and the one carved monolith that suggests the Inca believed they could bind the sun itself. Now we arrive at the part of Machu Picchu that refuses to stay silent. Because once you strip away the engineering, once you accept that the stones can be moved, shaped, and locked together, something else remains: purpose. This city doesn't just function, it points. Walk through Machu Picchu and you'll notice something unsettling. Very few elements are random. Doors frame mountains. Windows slice the horizon. Stairways guide your body the same way sightlines guide your eyes. This is not accidental beauty. This is controlled perception. Take the Temple of the Sun. It's the only curved structure in the city, already a red flag in a place dominated by straight lines. The wall wraps around a natural rock outcrop, turning the mountain itself into an altar. And once a year, during the winter solstice, something precise happens. At sunrise, a single beam of light enters through a carefully angled window and lands exactly where it should. Not nearby, not approximately, exactly. No instruments, no written math. Just observation, repetition, and terrifying patience. This tells us one thing clearly. The Inca weren't just watching the sky. They were synchronizing with it. Below the temple lies a cave often called the Royal Tomb. Cool, quiet, perfectly cut. Some believe it housed mummies of elite ancestors, beings the Inca considered still alive, still present, still influential. To them, death wasn't an end. It was a change of state. And above all of this, literally above the city, stands the most unsettling object of all. Intihuatana, a carved stone pillar rising directly from the bedrock. Its name roughly translates to the place where the sun is tied. Let that sink in. Not worshipped, not honored, tied. At certain times of year, the sun casts almost no shadow from this stone, as if hovering, paused, restrained, and the angles align with cardinal directions so cleanly it still unsettles modern surveyors. The Spanish usually destroyed these stones wherever they found them. Too dangerous, too symbolic, too powerful. But Intihuatana survived, likely because the conquerors never reached it. Now ask yourself, why place this object at the very heart of the city? Why elevate it, isolate it, and integrate it into the mountain itself? One answer keeps surfacing, no matter how uncomfortable it sounds. Machu Picchu was a ceremonial control center. Not control in a mechanical sense, but ideological control. Cosmic legitimacy. By aligning architecture with celestial cycles, the Inca weren't predicting time. They were owning it. If the sun rises where we command, if the seasons obey our stones, then our rule is written into the universe itself. Power doesn't get much stronger than that, which brings us back to the abandonment. When disease tore through the empire, when civil war fractured authority, when the Spanish shattered the old order, what happens to a place whose entire meaning depends on cosmic harmony? It becomes dangerous. A ritual site without ritual is just stone. A sacred engine without belief is unstable. So maybe the Inca didn't lose Machu Picchu. Maybe they closed it. They removed what mattered. They broke the roads. They let the jungle take the rest. Not as an accident, as a seal. And for 400 years, it worked. The city slept. Until one rainy day in 1911, when a local boy led an outsider up a forgotten path, and history snapped awake. Today, millions visit Machu Picchu. Cameras click. Feet wear down steps built for silence. Yet the city still doesn't give everything away. There are sealed chambers underground, unmapped cavities beneath plazas, alignments we're still arguing about. And that's the final truth of Machu Picchu. It was built by people who understood something we're still chasing. That endurance comes not from domination of nature, but from cooperation with it. Stone that moves instead of breaks. Water that flows instead of floods. A city that listens to the mountain instead of fighting it. And maybe that's why it still stands. Watching, quiet, patient, while civilizations rise and collapse below. If this story made you pause, if it bent your assumptions just a little, leave a comment below. Do you think Machu Picchu was a royal retreat, a sacred observatory, or something even more radical? A place designed to reshape reality through belief? Read other comments, challenge them, defend your idea. Because some mysteries don't need answers, they need conversation. And this one is far from finished.